Thank you for joining today's session. We will be getting started shortly. We do have a lot of folks signed up for today's session, and we want to give everyone a moment to log on and get connected so that we can dive into today's session. I do want to thank you all for joining us today. I am Jasmine Garrett here with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. Today's session is an informational overview on the Cultural Arts Facilities Expansion Cafe program. A quick housekeeping note, we do suspect that many questions will be answered in today's presentation. However, you are able to write in questions at any point during the presentation using Zoom's Q&A feature. It is one of your Zoom command options and will allow us to make sure we are able to get back to you and let others see these questions and answers as well. Today's session is being recorded and will be posted on our NJEDA and YouTube pages. The slides and other resources will also be available in the next few days. Now to get us started with the presentation, I will shift things over to NJEDA's Director of Brownfield and Sustainable Systems, Elizabeth Limbrick. Elizabeth?
Thank you very much, Jasmine. So glad to be here with all of you today. I want to acknowledge all of my colleagues that are here as well, so many that are working so hard to bring you this program. We have George Santos, who is our Chief Real Estate Development Officer, Dan Jennings, Executive Vice President of Real Estate Programs, Barbara Vadney, Team Lead, and Barbara Bickert as well, who has really helped us understand how to communicate best with this audience of art focused. So now we will move to the next slide. This is our agenda for today. We're going to take you through a couple different things. So first of all, a little bit very quick, how do tax credits work, the cafe overview, the program goals, and some key points. Then we'll jump into definitions and program eligibility. We'll provide you a little more detail on the program, as well as some information about our prevailing wage requirements, scoring, timeline, and fees. We'll talk about the application process, the ideal project, and finally, how to prepare for this program. So as far as how do tax credits work, the first thing we want you to understand is that this is not a grant program, this is a tax credit. So typically with our programs that are tax credits here at EDA, the awardee will usually sell the credit to an investor or tax credit syndicator. Once the project is completed, that investor or syndicator will then claim the credit during each year of what is called the eligibility period, and we'll talk more about that. Under the CAFE program, for example, if an awardee were to receive a $25 million award, the investor could then claim a tax credit of $5 million for each year during the 5-year eligibility period. An investor or syndicator is going to buy the tax credit from awardee at a discount. It has to be at least 85 cents on the dollar. In the example above, if an investor were to purchase that credit from an awardee for, let's say, 90 cents on the dollar, the investor would then purchase the credit for $4.5 million over each year of the 5-year eligibility period. An awardee of our tax credit programs in the real estate division here, like this one, this CAFE program, can use two methods to really bring cash into the project. The first is not how we typically see them, but I do want to make sure you understand. The first one is just to bring those proceeds from the sale directly into the project each year during the eligibility period. The second, which is really the most prevalent method, mostly what we see here, is to enlist a bridge lending source that will monetize the credit to bring cash into the program at the beginning of construction, which is when you really need it. However, they will have an interest rate, and that will then discount your tax credit award further. And your bridge lending source could be a tax credit investor, a bank, a syndicator, or even a wealthy philanthropist. So that's the brief overview on how tax credits work. Now, as far as the program's key features, this was established by a conditional veto of the Community Anchor Program in the Economic Recovery Act. So again, this is a tax credit program. It's for capital projects, so really to develop and rehabilitate cultural and arts facilities. Under this program, the tax credit is awarded for 100% of eligible project costs. That is a big number for us here at EDA, and we're really proud to have a program that is able to do this. We cap it at 75 million per project. You will need to show a project financing gap and that the project would not be economically feasible without this tax credit. This is a competitive program, which is a term we use at EDA. That means that we will have a window of which you will submit your application and a deadline. However, because we are very well funded, we do not expect to be oversubscribed, at least initially. And we may go back and refine the program in the future, but currently we have $1.2 billion available in tax credits. And as with other programs here at the EDA, this tax credit is transferable, which means it can be sold, as we talked about in the example before. And that is a very nice feature of the program. The goals of this program are to elevate arts and culture as a key sector in New Jersey's economy. We want to really increase the number of arts and cultural experiences for residents and visitors who will then spend money locally. We want to promote equitable engagement with the arts for underrepresented groups and underserved communities. And we really do recognize that this is different than some of our other real estate programs, and that the development of cultural arts institution facilities are inherently beneficial to the state because they provide vital contributions to the communities in which they are located. So just to reiterate, again, tax credit, not a grant, so it's a little bit more complicated. The board did approve the program and the rules on the January 23rd special board meeting. We are going to post those rules and the board memo on our website early next week. We are just in this period right now where the governor has the opportunity to review the board meeting minutes before they become formal. That deadline is the end of this week. Our program is meant to launch in early spring. The date is to be determined, but stay tuned. We will also share our email address, which is cafe@njeda.gov. And you can email us at that email address to be included on the email list to make sure that you're aware, but we'll also be posting on our website as well. The entire 1.2 billion is allocated and available. So again, we don't anticipate being oversubscribed in the near term. We did talk, I think, a lot about an operating reserve in the stakeholder engagement sessions that we did in the fall. It is something we talked a lot about, again, internally after we got feedback. And we recognize that this really is a very complex issue, and that for the initial rounds, we won't be including that. And just remember, that was only intended for unexpected expenses. So for these initial rounds, this is not going to be included. The program really is for construction and rehab, can be construction of new, or it could be an expansion of an existing or a rehab of an existing, so, or any combination thereof. We do require the minimum project to be $5 million. And I want to take you through some definitions now. This first one's a very important one. This is the cultural arts institution or the applicant. What I really want you to focus on is the part in green. So a cultural arts institution or applicant means an entity which has a primary mission and specific goal of cultural arts and cultural education or artistic enrichment of the people of the state, and is one of the following: either a government entity, a nonprofit, or a governmental, economic, or community development entity. So again, if you are any of those, you also have to have that primary mission and specific goal of cultural and arts. Primary mission, okay? Keep that in mind. Now, if you read the next paragraph below, there's also an exception for for-profit entities to use this program as well, if they are also receiving either a federal or state historic tax credit. So I just want folks to take a moment to think about that. again, for this program, the applicant is most likely going to be a nonprofit, except in those couple limited circumstances where you're a for-profit who gets also a historic tax credit. I also just flagged on this, I needed to put it somewhere in this presentation, when we talk about who's incurring costs, eligible costs could be incurred by both an applicant and affiliate, and we use the IRS definition of an affiliate. There is a lead development entity, so that's the one who's really doing the development activities at the site. They will be paid by the applicant to do that work. And in the case of a for-profit, there is an option for them to also bring in a co-applicant because that helps them with the sale of the tax credit, as well as to bring in some other services for the project. When we talk about what the projects are, there's the Cultural Arts Institution facility. And again, I want you to focus a lot on the part that's been bolded in green. But this means an existing or proposed cultural arts facility within the state that's operated and maintained by a cultural arts institution and that is open to the public. And we'll have more on that on the next slide. And a cultural arts institution facility includes, without limitation, an aquarium, botanical society, historical society, library, museum, gallery, performing arts center, arts-based community center, or any related facility that is principally for the support and benefit of the foregoing. The term cultural arts institution facility does not include athletics that are used predominantly for athletics, recreation, and non-arts-based community centers. So on the last slide, we talked about open to the public. This is something where we did a lot of engagement during our stakeholder session and also put a lot of careful thought into this. And we came up with the definition that you see here. Essentially what we're saying is that it doesn't require special membership or private status. Any member of the general public who wishes to enter can. Access can be only during specified hours. Access may require a ticket. That is okay. But if you are a place that does exhibits, like a museum, you need to be open at least 20 hours per week on average, and each of these are going to be on average. If you are performing arts, you need to have at least 4 events per month. And if you're arts education, then you need to have sessions at least 4 times per month. And I just want people to understand when we say on average, what we're saying is, for instance, if you're performing arts and you're closed during the summer, that's okay. We understand you don't have any events during the summer, but you're going to make up for that the rest of the year so that it averages out to at least 4 events per month. When we talk about what is the cultural arts project, it means a capital project for the construction or improvement of a cultural arts facility that is located in New Jersey and for which a cultural arts institution is to be awarded the tax credits by the authority under the program pursuant to a tax credit agreement, provided that the project for which the tax credit are awarded will result in a capital investment of at least $5 million. And here we have our definition of project cost. There's a lot of words on the slide. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but generally, this is consistent with our other programs. Generally, this is your construction costs. It also allows for building acquisition, but not land acquisition. We do not include vehicles, and we do allow for soft costs, which are going to be defined on the next slide. Costs will be reviewed for reasonableness, and we think of this sort of in 2 different ways. One, is it reasonable for the type of facility? So for example, if you're building a music education facility, do you need a helicopter pad? The answer is going to be no. That would not be a reasonable cost. And is the cost for what you're doing actually reasonable? So are you charging 3 times as much as the going rate to do demolition? If so, that's not going to be considered reasonable. So those are we're going to look at it from both aspects. And then the other piece that's on this slide is to let you know that if your cultural arts facility is part of a larger facility or a larger structure, If there are shared parts, like a foundation or a parking lot, we'll look at that on a pro rata basis based on square footage. As I promised, we have a definition about soft costs. Again, if you're familiar with any of our other programs, this is aligned pretty closely with our Aspire program. We are allowing soft costs up to 12 months prior to application. So that is a nice feature of this program. You will see here that we also allow fixtures and equipment with a useful life of 5 years or less. As we mentioned earlier, who can incur costs? Costs come from the applicant and the affiliate. And again, these costs have to be reasonable. Another feature of this program is that it does require a project financing gap. And this doesn't mean that you have more expenses than you have sources. It's really focused on this reasonable and appropriate return on investment. And so, this is getting a little in the weeds, but what we will be doing is evaluating this on an unlevered IRR using operational cash flows versus your actual costs. So the other thing that is on here, I think that is an important point, is this also talks about the minimum equity requirement. So in most cases, the minimum equity requirement is 20%. So that means you as the applicant have to show that you're putting at least 20% into the project. The exception is if you're in what's called a government restricted municipality, which for this program is defined as Patterson, Trenton, or Atlantic City, then the minimum equity requirement is only 10%. I mentioned having a reasonable and appropriate return on your investment. And this is our official definition, which is on this slide. I'm not going to read it to you, but it is there. But what we're looking for is that you're getting a fair and justifiable profit based on the specific project, looking at the location, the market conditions, and the risk factors. What we're trying to do is to ensure that the applicant can recoup their costs while not getting an excessive profit at the expense of the public benefit. So really a return that is considered fair and not overly lucrative. With that, I'm going to switch into the eligibility criteria for this program. So the first thing is that the applicant is required to own or lease the facility and is required to operate that facility for 5 years. And that includes the provision that it meets that definition of being open to the public that we spoke about earlier. We are requiring that the applicant provide the status of ownership or lease at application, meaning that at the time you submit your application, you're going to need to have a letter of intent or some other agreement that shows that the property owner is intending to enter into an official agreement with you. And that you will also need to have either an executed lease or ownership document as a condition of approval. So within 1 year of being approved by our board, you will need to have that. Again, we talked about this earlier, but you must have a minimum $5 million project. So we're talking about eligible costs here. And if you remember our earlier definition of a cultural arts institution, government and nonprofit organizations must have that primary mission of arts and culture. And the only exception is for a for-profit that receives either a federal or state historic tax credit. In addition, we do require a letter of support. I think a nice feature in this program is that we are allowing it from the chief executive of the municipality, which would be typically your mayor, or from city council. So most of our other programs require it from city council. That said, your business administrator is not your chief executive. So, make sure you're getting this letter from either, the mayor, city council, or, again, chief executive or governing body. If you think this might take some lead time, start talking to them now. If you're doing it through the city council, get on the docket now. In addition, the cultural arts institution is required to partner with one or more local community organizations that provide support and services to Work First New Jersey program recipients. And that's in order to provide work activity opportunities and other appropriate services to the Work First New Jersey program recipients. At the time of application, we are requiring that you have a letter of intent for the partnership, and then you'll have to have an executed commitment with them within 1 year of board approval. We talked about a project financing gap. Again, this is an eligibility requirement. We are also requiring an independent third-party market study showing that there is demand for the facility and that it's expected to be successful. And at time of application, it needs to be dated within 90 days of your application submittal. And if you already have one, just get it updated, showing that it's been updated within that 90-day window. Some additional eligibility criteria. Again, we spoke about this earlier, the equity requirement, 20%, except 10% in Atlantic City, Patterson, and Trenton. One unique feature is that we will allow the applicant to submit a fundraising plan to satisfy this requirement, and we will give them a year after board approval to actually raise that equity. In addition, the equity can consist of the usual sources. However, your property value shall not equal more than half of your equity contribution. And we did that because this program provides that 100% tax credit, which is more than our other programs. And so we want to make sure that our applicants do have a stake in this. And so that's why those provisions were included. The next one, and this is required by the legislation, that construction has not started prior to application. So if you have started construction on your project prior to application, that would make you ineligible for this program. With the following exceptions. So we did think this through. We do allow for you to have started and do demolition, environmental remediation, and to correct a health or safety hazard if you were ordered to do so by an official, and we would require documentation showing that an official did indeed order that work to be done. This program also has prevailing wage, which is pretty typical for most of the programs we have here at EDA. So there's two different things to think about here. One is our typical prevailing wage, which is on your construction contracts. An important point to note is that could include fixtures and permanent installations of things like sculptures and other art. The other piece is we also have prevailing wage for building services. So for things like janitorial services, they must also adhere to New Jersey's prevailing wage and labor compliance requirements. And we have another slide later on that goes into more detail about prevailing wage requirements. The other eligibility pieces, you have to complete your project within 4 years of executing your tax credit agreement with us. You have to be in good standing with our sister agencies, so taxation, labor and workforce development, as well as the environmental protection. And this is our last slide on eligibility, but we have a couple more to go over. You have to also demonstrate to us that you have the ability to successfully complete and then operate the cultural arts project throughout the 5-year eligibility period. And again, we're going to be requiring a market study, project budget, and operating costs, and that we're going to require that each applicant submit that operating plan detailing the programming you'll provide, how the facility will be staffed, that will help us make some of those determinations. In addition, we are also requiring green building standards for this program, which is similar to our other programs like Aspire. This slide, I think, is a really nice slide. The visuals, I think, really help explain what we're talking about when we talk about this eligibility period. So the formal definition is written out here. It means the period of 5 years during which a cultural arts institution may claim, sell, transfer, or otherwise use tax credits under the program. It begins in the tax period in which the authority accepts certification of the cultural arts institution that it has met the capital investment requirements of the program. So what we mean is that the eligibility period begins when your construction project is certified as complete, and then the eligibility period lasts for 5 years. And the applicant must operate the cultural arts facility throughout that 5-year eligibility period, and the tax credit is issued in 5 equal annual installments during that eligibility period. And as you can see on this slide, it starts with your project approval, your construction period. You have up to 4 years to then come in, certify your project is complete, 4 years from board approval, and that's when then your eligibility period starts. It's important that the cultural arts institution continue to operate the project throughout that 5-year eligibility period, continue to satisfy our program requirements, as well as any requirements in your tax credit agreements with us, and comply with reporting requirements throughout this period. We did also think about the fact that some of these places might be like a museum that might want to have a gift shop or a coffee shop or something like that. And they may be leasing a part of the building out in order to do that. And they may not be operating that portion of the building. And we found that that would be acceptable up to a limit. So what we said is you can lease out or sublease or otherwise reduce your tenancy up to 40% or 15,000 square feet, whichever is less. Okay, so that's important. Another piece that I wanted to include on here is just when we talk about when can construction start. Construction can start after you submit your application, but again, it's going to be at risk. And the work has to comply with all of our program rules and conditions, including but not limited to prevailing wage, public works contractor registration, and our green building requirements. Speaking of prevailing wage, here we are. So this is something very important. I want folks to focus and understand. These apply to all construction and building services work related to the cultural arts project. The obligations extend to work performed by various parties involved, including the applicant, contractors, subcontractors, and I'm going to add in here the subs sub and the sub, and all those other people that you didn't even know that they were hiring still need to adhere to these requirements, as well as commercial occupants if they're doing work related to this. The requirements cover construction contracts, and again, that could include things like permanent installations of sculptures and art, as well as other typical construction. Again, they start from the time you submit your application and go through the end of that eligibility period. In addition, if your project is part of a larger facility, if the lease is more than 35% of the facility, the prevailing wages apply to construction work at the entire facility. So if you're coming in and you're leasing a portion, again, of a larger facility, this could affect stuff outside of what just you were doing, but it applies to the entire facility. And then if that lease was actually 55% or more, then it's not just construction prevailing wage, but it's also building services as well that apply to that entire facility. The other piece we wanted to talk about, and this is something we've started to see can be a hurdle for some other programs that we've had, so we really wanted to focus on that with you, is this public works contractor registration. So each contractor and subcontractor and sub and sub that's performing work at the project has to be registered under the Public Works Contractor Registration Act and must comply with, again, those prevailing wage requirements. Non-compliance with this could result in forfeiting the entire tax incentive award, and it's something that may not be able to be corrected. So it's important to make sure you get this right. The registration requirement also extends to commercial tenants and occupants involved in the construction work. We also have affirmative action requirements. These are triggered upon submission of the application and remain in effect for 2 years following the issuance of the first certificate of compliance. Next, I wanted to share with you scoring. So again, this is a competitive program. We don't expect to be oversubscribed, at least not early on in the program. However, we did set this up to include a minimum score requirement. So this slide has sort of lays out the general scoring criteria, and we did come up with this in consultation with the New Jersey State Council on the Arts. These next 2 slides give some more detail about how we're going to be looking at each of these criteria and give you some ideas about what you can be thinking about now if you're preparing to apply. So first of all, we're requiring, at least for the first round, a minimum score of 40 out of 100. We may adjust that in the future depending on what we see from the first round. So the first one we look at is the amount of the tax credit requested versus your need. So are you leveraging other sources of funding? If you have other sources of funding, you can get additional points. Are you advancing the state, regional, and local goals of arts and culture facilities in underserved communities? So the way we're going to look at that is whether or not the location is in an underserved area as defined by the NAICS code for arts and culture. And then it's listed on the bottom of the slide. We've done that already on a per capita basis and determined which counties that is. And so if the project is located in one of those counties, you get those points. Next up is a big one, 30 points. We look at the link to the local development strategy. There's 2 pieces to this. The first is, do you have a letter of support from the governing body that we talked about earlier? So either from city council or from the mayor, right? If that's an eligibility requirement, you have to have that letter. If that letter also describes how the project aligns with the development goals for the municipality, you get additional points. The other piece to this is you can get additional points if you give us evidence that the project is permitted, a permitted use according to the local use zoning or redevelopment plan. So in order to do that, either you're going to give us a letter from the local zoning official verifying that the project is an allowed use, or you're going to show us the local zoning ordinance or redevelopment plan and how this project complies with that. The next one is about job creation and economic development. We'll be looking for a narrative explanation from you on how this will generate economic development and jobs. And in addition, we will also be reviewing your market plan, economic impact statement, staffing plan, and EDA staff will be using the in-plan model to make that assessment. We also look at economic and social distress. So if your project is located in certain areas, so again, those government restricted municipalities that we've talked about before, Atlantic City, Patterson, and Trenton, or if it's in a qualified incentive tract, or if it's in one of the municipalities that's ranked as the top 10 most distressed communities by the Municipal Revitalization Index. If it's any one of those, you get these points. We are coming up, we have a mapping tool. It's just about ready to launch. We'll be putting that on the CAFE webpage so that you can take a look and see if your project is in one of those locations. The next one, we're looking at whether or not there's new full-time jobs, and we're going to assess that based on the type of project that you're coming in with. So if it's new or an expansion, we believe that just by virtue of that, you're going to get the points because we're showing that we're adding real estate. So that's going to add jobs. If you're just renovating a facility, then we're going to have to look at whether or not your facility already meets the definition of open to the public that we talked about earlier. If it doesn't, then it shows to us that you're adding something additional. And so in that case, you can get those points as well. We also have a criterion for whether or not your board is diverse and representative of the community. This one you can opt out of. You can choose not to submit the data, but if you do that, then you don't get any points for this. But if your board is diverse and you want to share that data with us, there'll be a self-certification form. We'll look at the percent ownership from each diverse owner, and we'll need an explanation for diversity and why it's representative of the community. And then lastly, we want to look at the approach and plan for affordable offerings to the general public. So, are you offering free or discounted options for the plan for people to be able to come in and use the facility, things like that. And so we'll be looking at your mission and your strategic plan and your explanation for that. So next up is just briefly, I wanted to show you our application review process. So you remember we talked about earlier being in good standing with our sister agencies. We're going to do a check on that. We're going to have to score the applications. We'll check and make sure that they meet the eligibility criteria. There'll be a legal review, an underwriting review, all of that prior to going to our board for a decision. And the board would then certify that the applicant is a cultural arts institution. They would make their decision based on project eligibility and feasibility, and the priority for an award based on the available funding and the minimum score. I think this is a really helpful slide that helps people understand sort of how this whole program kind of comes together. So I do want to walk you through this. So first of all, the applicant submits their application by a pre-established deadline. You can actually start construction at risk as soon as you submit your application, or after you submit your application. But I do want to make sure it's clear to folks that when we say at risk, first of all, you might not be approved for the program. Maybe you're not eligible or some other reason. But you still have to comply with all of the program requirements, like prevailing wage. After you submit your application, we will review them and score them. This is for ones that are going to be approved. The top ranked ones then move to the board for approval. Assuming they get approved by the board, you will get an approval letter. You will have 1 year to satisfy those conditions of approval. Then you will enter into a tax credit agreement with us. You will have 4 years to then reach your temporary certificate of occupancy. So you'll be doing some construction, you'll be doing your annual reporting. And then when you're done, you will come back to us to certify that the project is complete, showing us you have that TCO. When that happens, that is when that 5-year eligibility period starts. And that is when you are issued your tax credit incentive award and when you are also operating the facility. I did want to give you some additional program details as well. Within 1 year of board approval, again, you have several conditions that are going to have to be met. These are your approval letter conditions. These include, but are not limited to, documentation of site control. At that point, you'll need to have the deed or lease. You'll have to have your executed financial commitments and executed fundraising commitments and show us the capital that's been raised. You'll have to have a plan for your green building. You have to have site approval and copies of your required permits, planning and zoning approvals, and that executed document for partnership with the community organization that's providing support and services to the Work First New Jersey program recipients. At the end of your project, the construction project, you're going to need to show us, again, a certificate of occupancy. A temporary one is acceptable. CPA, certification of actual project costs. A floor plan showing your actual and proposed uses. Permanent financing commitments and an updated pro forma. If applicable, a labor harmony agreement probably will not be applicable in most cases. Proof of prevailing wage for construction and building services, proof of your green building standards, and any other information that we are requiring. There are reporting requirements for this program. This is pretty standard. These align with our other programs. So you'll have progress reports every 6 months from board approval through the agreement, and then you'll have annual reports from agreement through the 5-year eligibility period. We also have requirements around forfeiture. These will be in the rules that will be posted next week. Pretty standard for us. I would say the one unique feature for this is if you don't operate or are not open to the public, that would be another reason where you would end up forfeiting your tax credit. And we have more information. Again, these slides will be available for you to review. This slide shows the program fees. These fees were set based on an analysis of similar programs to ensure that they cover the administrative costs. So what we did is we looked at projects, we split them into two tiers. There's the ones that are less than 20 million and 20 million and more, and have different fees depending on your project size. So you can see there are different types of fees, from application fee. When you get an approval from the board, in order to get that approval, you'll have to have submitted those fees. Getting your certificate at the end, there's a fee associated with that. There's an annual servicing fee. And then there's some other fees that may or may not apply to your project. If you're transferring or assigning this to somebody else, doing modifications, minor or major, 6-month extensions, or a termination. So we're getting near the end, but I did want to just share with you how this works. So claiming the tax credit, this tax credit is only applied to insurance premium and corporate business tax. It can be transferred, but one time only. However, during that one time, you can break it into smaller increments. So it can actually go to multiple parties, but you can only transfer it the one time. Those increments can be as low as $25,000. We do have a floor. We talked about this earlier. The minimum we allow for you to sell it is 85 cents on the dollar. And then there's just some other stuff in here, that the transferee may carry forward, all are part of the tax credit for the next 5 tax periods. The ideal project for this program, we talked about it earlier, so you're going to hear me say it again, is one where the applicant has a primary mission and specific policy goal of cultural, arts and culture education or artistic enrichment of the people of the state. If that's not you, you are not an applicant for this program. However, it doesn't mean that you can't partner with somebody who is eligible and they could be the applicant for the program. Or I think, I'm seeing that some folks are going to be establishing their own nonprofit that meets the eligibility criteria. So that's also an option. It's up to you. We're not telling you what to do, but just trying to share that there are other ways to make sure that you can take advantage of this program. Capital investment, again, minimum project size is $5 million. It's important to understand that the applicant is the one who is doing coming in, applying for the program, is also required to own or lease the facility, which is a condition of the approval, and they must operate the venue for at least that 5-year eligibility period. Another thing that would be good is if you have a project that's already using prevailing wage, that's great. You have to show us that project financing gap, partnering with that Work First New Jersey organization, being able to complete your construction within 4 years of the tax credit award agreement, and having community buy-in and market sustainability. I did want to share with you some tips on how to prepare as we get ready to launch this program, things you can be thinking about doing now. First, sign up for updates from us at cafe@njeda.gov. Think about who will be the applicant and whether they are eligible. Do they meet the primary mission requirement that we had? Start defining your project. What is, get your architect, what are your project costs, your site zoning features and constraints, getting your market study, fundraising plan, operating plan, raising your capital, assembling your team, and assembling your sources of funding and financing, including that equity source, getting your letters of support from the mayor or the city council, as well as the organization that supports Work First New Jersey participants, As soon as the cafe rules are ready on our website next week, start taking a look at those. Consider participating in our in-person networking event if your application is at that stage. We'll talk about that in another slide. Don't start your construction until application submission, because you remember that's an eligibility requirement. We'll be posting FAQs and an application checklist, not available yet, but they will be. So take a look at our website for those. You can submit questions to us at cafe@njeda.gov. And make sure if you want to come in, because it's a competitive program, you have to submit your application by the closing date for each round. There will be future rounds. So if you don't make it in the first round, you can come in for a future round. And at this stage, I think Jasmine is on the line here. We did have a question for you, for the audience. We're going to open a poll, and what we want to know is how much time do you need in order to be able to prepare an application and make sure that it's complete. So we are giving you 3 choices here. Can you get all of this information and submit your application if we have a window that is 60 days, 75 days, or 90 days? Pick the one that is the least that you need in order to be able to make sure that you could have a complete application. So we'll give that another minute. And as you are answering that poll question, I'm just going to take you guys to one more slide. We are working on putting together an in-person networking event. Details to follow. We don't have it yet, but space will be limited. So we are looking for folks to come that have a project in mind that is at least 5 million or more, and that the organization can meet that 20% equity match, or 10% if you're in a GRM, that you're able to fund the upfront planning costs. So there are things like a market study, putting together your conceptual plans, things of that nature that typically cost money. Perhaps you're partnering with somebody who says, we're going to donate this for free, something like that. But those are things that you need to think about and think, can you get those pieces of information that we are requiring? Do you have community buy-in and market sustainability for this project? And will you be able to evidence that site control? So whether you're going to own it, lease it, or can you at least get that letter of intent from the owner? So with that, let's close the poll, Jasmine, and can you share the results? Okay. So some folks said they could do it in 60 days. About the same amount said 75 days, and twice as much said they need the 90 days. So we appreciate that feedback. And that really concludes, I believe, our formal presentation. And at this point, I think there have been some questions that have been answered in the chat or the Q&A, but we're available to answer other questions now as well.
Yes, we do have a few questions in the Q&A feature. We'll start with the first one. Are the future operating cash flows used to demonstrate the existence of a project financing gap exclusive to the project seeking the tax credit approval? For example, would an expansion of an existing facility be limited to net new revenues or include existing revenues and new revenues?
I think that's a good question that we received. I see Dan Jennings looks like he wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we would do both, but for some of these questions, we're gonna respond and post a response in the FAQs on the program website.
Thanks. Next question.
Does the leasing out work for performing arts centers who lease the concessions out?
Yes, so that is exactly what we had in mind when we put that leasing provision in there, that you can lease out up to either 15,000 square feet or 40% of the facility, whichever is less.
Are rents archived from subletting included in the analysis of a project financing gap? Would construction costs of the sublease space be included as project costs for purposes of sizing the tax credit?
So the answer is yes to both if those costs, construction costs are being incurred by the applicant and not the whoever's leasing the space.
Prevailing wage. Does this apply to services that our facility regularly uses that has nothing to do with potential construction project? Like, what if our HVAC contractor isn't prevailing wage?
So I think this is one we'll need to bring in our prevailing wage experts and respond to probably in our FAQs to look at that a little bit more closely.
Is there consideration for commissioned artwork?
Maybe we need a little more detail on what that question is. Is that related to prevailing wage? Because if it is, it still needs to meet the prevailing wage requirement.
Is there an overlap with when the Art Phase 2 grant winners will be announced with this submission deadline? Those projects may be strong leverage points for application narratives.
I don't know that we have an overlap. I'm not sure when Art Phase 2 winners are going to be announced. But I think it's likely that that would happen prior to this program having the window closed for applications.
I can just chime in there, Elizabeth. What we're expecting is early summer. That's the target date for when we think we'll be able to announce Art 2.
Early summer, okay, so it could be close.
Dan, responding to your previous question here, no, the new development corporation would not control the applying entity.
So, yeah, right now, the statute limits applicants to whoever the entity is that's going to lease or own the premises and operate the premises. So we would probably need to change the statute. We are looking at possible changes, but we can't guarantee when those changes will occur.
Are performing arts centers at state universities eligible? Are nonprofit private universities eligible?
So we're going to say that if it's the university applying or university foundation that's applying, and their primary mission is not arts and culture, then the answer is no. If that university or state university has a 501c3 whose primary mission is arts and culture, then the answer is probably yes.
If prior work was done with approval from the NJEDA HPRA credit, will this be considered an exception for prior construction?
I think we can consider this and probably answer this one in FAQs. My gut would be there's not an exception for that in the program rules.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues we're weighing now is, let's say you have a 20,000 square foot facility, and the project involves like 15,000 square feet. Is work done to the 5,000 square foot remaining space make the project ineligible? We would maybe not, but to Elizabeth's point, like, this is not an exception.
Please speak to interface between Secretary of the Interior Historic Building Standards and Green Standards.
So
Yeah, go ahead, Elizabeth.
so the green building standards apply here. So you have to adhere to those. if you're coming in as a for-profit because you have historic tax credits, then yes, you need to also, do what you have to do to comply with those requirements, which would be the Secretary of the Interior Building Standards. But that doesn't relieve you from satisfying the green building standards under this program.
The fees can be taken from the tax credit award, or do we have to have those amounts on hand?
Those fees are not eligible costs. So yes, you need to be able to.
Yeah, you need to front those costs.
Yeah.
Okay, so the tax credit potentially covers the full cost of the project?
So the answer is, on the surface, it looks like it does, but it doesn't. Here's why. Let's say that you have, the project is 30 million and all the costs are eligible. We can give you a $30 million tax credit, but how much of that can you convert? Like, how much of that tax credits will end up being converted into cash, right? What's the cash amount or the proceeds from the tax credit award? By the time depending on how you monetize it, you may only see half of that award as cash. So yeah, you have to, like, again, part of the reason why we're putting together a session where there'll be consultants and tax credit brokers and syndicators is you have to get a sense of, if I get a full award, how much cash can I really bring into the project, and how do I cover the rest of the budget? So the answer is no.
Our project is 90% designed. Are those costs eligible?
So we do allow soft costs up to 12 months prior to the date that you submit your application. And those would be considered soft costs. There is a cap on soft costs. The maximum we allow is up to 20% of your total eligible project costs.
About land not being included. If we're purchasing a building and doing extensive renovation to repurpose a building that was not an arts facility and it sits on land, can the land be part of the project? I'm talking about the land under the building, a parking lot.
So you're asking what are eligible expenses, I guess, project expenses?
Yeah. So the land acquisition portion or cost is not an eligible project expense. I believe we would be able to count the land towards the equity requirement.
Three months, not nearly enough time to submit/prepare project application. Since this is a brand new program, 6, most likely 12 months would be more realistic.
So we've thought about that issue, and we realize, like, some applicants are in a better position to submit within, 75 days or whatever the application window is. We're hoping to launch 2 application rounds this year, to address that situation. But we realize that some of the people on the call are not going to have enough time to submit for the initial application round.
So if you have already started the project, is it a definitely a no-go? Even if the project would meet all the requirements?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a no-go based on the statute. We would need the law change, and the question would be, what's the justification for changing the law?
Will the Q&A be included in the webinar?
Jasmine, we might have to ask you that.
So the questions that are answered live in today's session will be included in the webinar, yes.
Right, but we also ask each of the attendants, and by the way, thank you for jumping on this call. We're thrilled to see such high demand for this program. But check on the website, like check back in the future on the website under the frequently asked questions section we will post answers to like the questions that we didn't sufficiently answer today.
We do have quite a few questions left.
We are at 1 o'clock. So we could probably either, if folks want to stay on, we could try and answer some of these questions, or if it's better, we could, respond to this in FAQs.
Let's just ask a few more.
Okay.
We have a project that we broke ground on and meet all program requirements. Since we broke ground, are we prohibited from applying due to construction starting?
Unfortunately, the answer is yes, based on the existing statute.
The only exceptions, again, were for demolition and remediation, or that piece that if an official had ordered you to do so to correct a health and safety hazard.
How can we obtain info about the cafe in-person networking events?
I think make sure you email us at cafe@njeda.gov so we can get you on our email list.
Can the applicant be a municipality?
Only to the extent that that municipality can meet the definition of a cultural arts institution facility that has a primary mission of arts and culture. So
Yeah. So for instance, if the municipality has a arts and cultural department or division, could that division apply? Probably. But again, it wouldn't be like say the city of South Orange. I'm just picking out a city. Don't be offended if there's any South Orange folks on the call. But if the city applied, probably not the city, but if the city either has a department that applies whose primary mission is arts and culture, or if there's like a 501(c)(3) entity that applies, then that would be a way of meeting the eligibility requirement.
So if that's what you're going to do, I think make sure to email us at that cafe@njeda.gov so we can explore that some more on that specific case.
Does prevailing wage apply to the general contractor or construction management team?
It applies to everybody.
Yeah, on the construction, yes.
Yeah.
The next one I see is Cafe and Aspire. I don't see how you can apply to both. I can see a project possibly using both. So remember, usually a special purpose entity of a real estate development entity applies for Aspire. For Cafe, you have to be a nonprofit, a governmental entity, or a for-profit receiving a federal state historic tax award in order to be eligible to apply for a cafe. Now, in the case of a mixed-use project, let's say the ground floor is the cultural arts facility and the upper floors is residential, could whoever's operating that ground floor space apply for a cafe, and then the rest of the project goes into the Aspire application? That's a possibility. But again, you're still talking about two different entities, one entity applying for cafe and another entity applying for Aspire.
Here's
I see the next one about like kind of government building with mixed use
Mhm.
Qualify. So to the extent that they're coming in for this new expansion, and they meet the other eligibility criteria, being an eligible applicant and whatnot, if the expansion is around cultural arts, then that expansion part sounds like it would be eligible.
What is this? From David Mannheimer.
Mhm.
So the regs specifically say that recreation activities are not eligible. So I think in a case like sports facility, we generally see the merit in having a sports facility, particularly in places that are underserved by such facilities. But this program is not intended to support sports facilities. So I'm going to say err on the side of being conservative and say this is not eligible.
Yeah, it'd have to be like a de minimis use, I think. It does say predominantly, so if it's a small part of the project, I think we
Right.
could take a look at it, and you'd have to convince us why um that should
Yeah.
be an eligible part of the project.
Yeah, so to Elizabeth's point, let's say you build a 50,000 square foot facility, 45,000 of it is clearly a cultural arts facility, and maybe some of it is used for, a recreation use. We could probably look at that. And at worst, we would need to prorate the budget and say, okay, the entire facility is not eligible, but that part that's devoted to the arts and cultural use is eligible.
And I see the next part, they did ask about the installation of artwork, for commissioned artwork. Yes, it still requires prevailing wage for that.
Yeah, someone here, a little bit down, Science Center and Museum is eligible? Yes, I'm gonna say yes. Elizabeth?
I'm gonna say the museum is eligible. I think I need to understand what a science center is,
Yes, yeah.
because this is
Is,
not, the definition really requires arts and culture.
right,
It does not talk about science, but a science museum would be eligible.
correct. So yeah, so if the Science Center, if there's like research being conducted in the Science Center, then like multiple like universities are conducting research and it's, we're obviously it's a great thing, but it's not, that wouldn't be eligible for this program. If it's something that educating the public, open to the public, then it's more eligible than not eligible.
I think
No, the applicant's budget cannot be used to meet the 20% equity match. Now, one thing I want to stress that's unlike other tax credit programs is that applicants can produce a fundraising plan. They can raise private dollars, get pledges from say donors, or produce a fundraising plan that says this is how we're going to meet the equity requirement, and we'll accept those, right? And we'll give you up to a year after board approval to put your fundraising plan into place, right? To get your commitments.
And I do see another question on here about accepting the minimum equity and project financing. I just want to make sure there's no formal maximum for the percentage. So the maximum is 100%. And,
Right.
Assuming that you meet the project financing gap, eligible costs, we're looking at 100% for the tax credit, up to a cap of $75 million per project.
Right. Let me answer this question about the cultural institution. So a cultural institution may engage a feed developer to build the project, right? But that feed developer cannot apply and accept the tax credits. They can help the cultural arts applicant do that work. But yeah, so the program right now doesn't allow the developer to apply for the program. Again, not ideal under certain circumstances. But this is Charles Liebling. Happy to have a call with you to discuss ways to address this.
And I think the next two questions may be related to this, which are developers' fees eligible costs? And should we factor those fees into the 20% equity requirement?
No, developer fees are generally not eligible under this program. but I think contractor fees could be an eligible soft cost. We'll check the rules and, and post the response and the FAQs on the website.
And we already answered the next question about a government building. Can a county government co-author the letter of support? Well, the letter of support has to come from either
From
the
the-
chief
yeah.
executive or the governing body. Governing body is a fancy term we use, which means city council or whatever the equivalent is in the municipality. So no, the county government, if they want to co-sign it, that's great. Happy to see it, but we need it from those other ones. And then would contracting for the construction be considered starting construction? I don't believe so. It's actual
Yeah,
start.
but like Elizabeth, on that, let's post a response. I
Oh.
think like starting to order materials is probably not the same thing, but we're gonna, I want us to
Yeah.
check with our labor client.
Check with our legal on that one, okay.
Yeah.
And then we already answered the question about Science Center and Museum. And would a township library qualify as a cultural resource facility? The statute specifically mentioned libraries as eligible
Yeah.
projects. So it likely would be eligible as long as the applicant is eligible and follows all of the other requirements that we have. And I think that answered all of the open questions that we had. So again, thank you to everybody who joined us. Really appreciate everybody coming here and sharing your time with us. And we're excited to see what projects you bring us.